David Warren was 38 years old when he woke up from a 10-month coma, and the first thing he saw, the very first thing, was his wife standing in his hospital room 8 months pregnant, not with his child. He had been unconscious since January. The math was not complicated. Petra stood at the foot of his bed, words already forming, an explanation already rehearsed. David could not yet speak in full sentences. His body was still relearning itself, but his mind, the engineer's mind that had spent a career calculating load, stress, and structural failure, was working perfectly. He looked at her stomach. He looked at her face. He looked at his Uncle Jerome standing silently in the corner, and Jerome's expression told him everything the notebook in Jerome's pocket already confirmed. Petra believed she was looking at a broken man. A man 10 months behind the world, physically diminished, emotionally devastated, with no idea what had been done to him while he was gone. She had no idea how wrong she was. What David did next would cost her everything. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The city was still dark when David Warren got to the site. He liked it that way. That hour before sunrise, when the air was cool and thin and Atlanta hadn't started making noise yet, that was his hour. Just him. The blueprints rolled under his arm, and the structure rising out of the Georgia clay like something that had always meant to be there. He pulled on his hard hat and stepped past the chain-link gate. The bridge was close to done. 42 feet of reinforced concrete and steel cable spanning a drainage channel between two public parks. Nothing flashy, no landmark, but thousands of people would cross it every day without thinking about it, without knowing his name. And that was fine. That was exactly fine. David had never needed credit. He needed the thing to hold. He moved along the east walkway, crouching once to press his palm flat against a concrete pour from the day before. Still cool. Set well. He made a note on the margin of the blueprint. A man on his crew, young kid, maybe 23, had asked him once why he still came to sites himself. "You're the engineer," the kid said. "Other guys just review photos." David had looked at him. "Photos don't tell you if a pour's set right," he said. "Your hand does." The kid had nodded slowly, the way young people nod when they file something away to think about later. David hoped he'd thought about it. He had been building things his whole life. He and Petra met at a work function. Her hospital, his firm, some downtown mixer that neither of them had really wanted to attend. She was laughing at something when he saw her across the room, head tilted back, sharp and confident and completely at ease in a crowd of people she'd just met. He remembered thinking, "She is so certain of herself." He had admired that, immediately, and without reserve. They married 2 years later. He was 28. She was 25. 10 years ago now. They had a good life. A house in a quiet subdivision outside the city. 4 bedrooms, 2-car garage, a backyard Petra had landscaped exactly the way she wanted. 2 incomes, no debt outside the mortgage. Vacations every year, nice ones, places with beaches and room service. David drove a used truck he'd bought for reliability. Petra drove a leased Audi she replaced every 3 years. He didn't mind that. He didn't mind most things. The children question had come up early, and then kept coming up. And the answer had always been Petra's to give. Not yet. The timing, the career, the partnership track at the practice she'd been grinding toward. He understood. He was patient. He would wait until she was ready because he loved her, and because the life they had was good. And he was not a man who pushed. He had told himself this so many times it had stopped feeling like patience and started feeling like fact. The sky was starting to lighten at the edges when he finished his walk through. He stood at the center of the bridge for a moment, both hands on the cable rail, and looked east toward where the sun was coming. The city hummed somewhere behind him. The structure did not move. It'll hold, he thought. It'll hold for 50 years. He rolled the blueprints back under his arm and walked to his truck. The drive to the second site was 40 minutes on a good day. He had coffee in the cup holder and a radio station playing something quiet and instrumental. He thought about the concrete pour. He thought about the punch list meeting at 2 o'clock. He thought, briefly, about Petra. She'd been distracted lately. He'd noticed, because he noticed things, it was wired into him, the same instinct that made him press his palm to concrete, the way she angled her phone away at dinner, the later hours, more frequent than before. The conversations that used to run long and then, at some point he couldn't pinpoint, had gotten shorter without either of them naming it. He'd turned it over in his mind a few times and set it back down. She was busy. The practice was demanding. She had always been someone who moved fast and needed space to do it. That was not new. That was just Petra. He loved her. He had decided to love her, and he was not a man who reversed his decisions. The light ahead was green. He moved through the intersection at normal speed, coffee in the cup holder, blueprint notes running through the back of his mind like a quiet engine. He never saw the other car. It came from the left, fast and without warning. A red light blown completely. The driver looking down at something that wasn't the road. The impact hit the driver's side door like a wall falling sideways. The coffee flew. The blueprints flew. The world made a sound like everything breaking at once. And then there was nothing. Just silence. Just dark. Jerome Warren got the call at 6:47 in the morning. He was in his kitchen, still in his robe, pouring his second cup of coffee. The number on the screen said, Grady Memorial. He set the cup down carefully, the way a man does when some quiet part of him already knows. He was in his car 11 minutes later. He found David in the ICU, behind a curtain, connected to more machines than Jerome could count. The sound of the monitors was constant and rhythmic and deeply wrong in the way that only hospital sounds can be. Steady, but not reassuring. Steady the way a clock is steady. Just marking time. A nurse told him the words: traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, medically induced coma to reduce swelling. They would know more in the coming days. Jerome pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. He was 62 years old, and he had buried his brother, David's father, 6 years ago. He had buried his sister-in-law 2 years after that. David was all that was left of the family he had come from, the family he had helped raise, the family he had shown up for every time without being asked. He sat in that chair, and he held David's hand, and he did not say anything for a long time. Petra arrived 3 hours later. She came through the ICU doors in her work clothes, still in her white coat, as if the call had reached her mid-shift. Her eyes were red. She cried when she saw him. Real tears, the kind that don't have any performance in them. She took Jerome's arm and leaned on him, and he held her up without thinking about it. He did not have any reason then to think about anything else. That first week, Jerome went home only to sleep. He brought a change of clothes in a bag. He learned the nurses by name. He learned the rhythm of the shift changes, the timing of David's vitals checks, the particular sound of the monitor when something was off versus when it was just doing its job. On the fourth day, he stopped at a drugstore on the drive-in and bought a small spiral notebook and a ballpoint pen. He didn't have a clear reason for it. He was a methodical man. 31 years with the Postal Service had made him that way, or maybe he had always been that way, and the Postal Service had simply given it structure. He believed in writing things down. He believed that what gets recorded gets remembered, and what gets remembered can be used. He wrote the date at the top of the first page. He listed the nurses on shift. He noted that Petra had arrived at 8:15 a.m. and stayed until 2:30 p.m., and that she had spoken to Dr. Ash for approximately 10 minutes near the window. He didn't know what he was building. He just kept laying the bricks. For the first 2 months, Petra came every day, then every other day. Jerome wrote it down. By month 4, she was coming twice a week, then once. She always had a reason, a long shift, a covering schedule, a procedure she couldn't hand off. Jerome did not judge the reasons out loud. He wrote them in the notebook next to the dates. By month 5, Dr. Patricia Ashe, David's lead neurologist, a precise and serious woman who spoke with the kind of calm that came from decades of delivering news that could go either way, told Jerome that David's brain activity was showing encouraging patterns, that the sustained coma was becoming less necessary, that they were cautiously optimistic. Jerome asked her to say that again. She did. He wrote it in the notebook with a firm hand. He called Petra that evening and told her. She said that was wonderful. She said she would come by that weekend. She came 3 weeks later. A man named Andre Thibodeau visited the hospital for the first time in month 2. Jerome had met him once before. Some hospital function David had mentioned in passing. A colleague of Petra's, the kind of man who shook your hand too firmly and remembered your name too quickly. Jerome had not thought much about him then. He thought about him now. Andre came 3 times total, always alone, always during afternoon hours when the floor was quiet. He did not bring anything, no flowers, no food, none of the small gestures people bring when they are visiting someone they are hoping will get better. The 3rd visit was the one that stayed with Jerome. He had been sitting in the hallway. The chair outside David's room had become his chair in the way that things become yours when you occupy them long enough. When he heard Andre's voice through the partially open door, calm, specific, unhurried, asking Dr. Ashe about survivability, about long-term prognosis, about what improving actually meant in practical terms. Dr. Ashe's answer was measured but clear. The outlook had shifted. She was encouraged. Andre said very little after that. Jerome heard footsteps. He looked up from his notebook as Andre came through the door. Andre glanced at him once, a brief, flat glance, the kind that doesn't register a person so much as confirm one is present, and walked down the hallway toward the elevator. Jerome watched him go. Then he looked down at the page in front of him and wrote the date, the time, and what he had heard. Andre did not come back after that. Jerome wrote that down too. Month 7. Petra stopped coming. She sent a cousin once with a small vase of yellow flowers. Jerome thanked the woman, set the flowers on the windowsill, and wrote the date in the notebook. He noted that it was not Petra. Month 8. Nothing. Month 9. Jerome was in the hallway in the early evening when he heard the elevator open at the far end of the corridor. Footsteps. Familiar ones. He looked up. Petra was walking toward the nurse's station. A brief check-in, it appeared, the kind that took 5 minutes and did not require sitting down. She had her bag on her shoulder and her head up, and she moved the way she always moved, quickly and with purpose. She passed under the long fluorescent light above the corridor. Jerome went very still. He looked at her. He looked at the unmistakable curve beneath her coat, the particular way her posture had shifted to carry a weight that had not been there before. He sat with it, the slow, careful arithmetic of a man who already knows the answer but needs a moment to let it settle into place. 10 months. David had been in that room for 10 months. The math was not complicated. Jerome looked down at the open notebook in his lap. He picked up the pen. His hand was steady. He wrote the date. He wrote the time. He wrote what he had seen. The first thing David Warren saw was a ceiling tile. White. Rectangular. A small water stain near the upper left corner, shaped like nothing in particular. He stared at it for a long time. It felt important, somehow. The plainness of it. The stillness. Something real and fixed to anchor himself to while everything else came back slowly, piece by piece, like furniture being carried into an empty room. Sound came next. A monitor, beeping with steady patience, a soft hiss somewhere behind his head, a distant voice down a hallway, calm and clipped, the language of hospitals, then a hand, warm, gripping his, holding on the way people hold on when they have been holding on for a very long time and are not quite ready to believe they can stop. David turned his head. It took more effort than it should have. His neck felt wrong, thick, disconnected, like a machine that had been left sitting too long without use. Jerome's face came into focus. His uncle was bent forward in a chair pulled tight against the bed, both hands wrapped around David's right hand, tears running without apology down the lines of his face. Jerome had never been a man who cried easily. He was a man who showed up and stayed and did what needed doing. But he was crying now, steadily, silently, like a man who had held something back for a very long time and no longer needed to. David opened his mouth. It took a while to make it work. "Hey," he said, or tried to say. What came out was barely shaped like the word. Jerome made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, something in between, something that belonged only to that moment. "Hey yourself," he said. The days that followed were not graceful. Walking was an excavation. Speech came back in fragments, single words, then short phrases, the sentences rebuilding themselves from the inside out. His right hand trembled when he tried to write. He slept 12, 14 hours and woke feeling like he hadn't slept at all. But his mind came back faster than anyone expected. Dr. Patricia Ashe, precise, unhurried, with 30 years of neurology behind every word she said, sat with him on the third day and walked him through a standard cognitive assessment. She asked him to count backward from 100 by sevens. He made it to 2 without hesitation, paused on the next one, then kept going without prompting. She asked him to recall a sequence of 6 words she had given him 12 minutes earlier. He got 5. She asked him to describe the last thing he remembered before the accident. He described the intersection, the color of the light, the angle of the other vehicle. She noted the detail. She noted the focus. She wrote something in his chart that he could not read from the bed. Later, Jerome told him what she had said in the hallway. His cognitive recovery is remarkable. Whatever is driving it, let's not interfere. David understood, without needing to examine it, what was driving it. He had been still for 10 months. His body had been still. His life had been still. Everything in him that had spent 38 years building things, systems, structures, solution, had been waiting in the dark with nowhere to go. Now, there was somewhere to go. He just did not yet know how far he would need to travel. Jerome called Petra on the morning of the 4th day. She arrived the following afternoon. David heard the door before he saw it open. He was sitting up in the bed, pillows stacked behind him, and his eyes went to the door the way a man's eyes go when he has been waiting for something without admitting to himself that he has been waiting. She came through, and he felt something move in his chest, real and immediate, the 10 months collapsing all at once, the relief of her face, of her being there, of the specific shape of someone you love walking toward you when you thought you might never see them again. He tried to say her name. Then she turned sideways to set her bag on the chair near the window, and the word died before it reached his lips. Jerome was standing in the corner. He had not moved. He would not move. David looked at Petra's stomach. He looked at the undeniable, unmistakable fullness of it beneath her jacket. He looked at the way she carried herself, the slight backward tilt, the careful step, the posture of a woman 8 months into something that had been growing in the dark right alongside his silence. He looked at Jerome. Jerome's face did not change. He did not look away. He just held David's gaze with the steady, sorrowful expression of a man who had been waiting 10 months to stop carrying something alone. The room was very quiet. Petra was already talking. Her voice was low and halting and prepared. "Grief," she said. "Loneliness. The not knowing. I didn't know if you were coming back. I didn't know how long I was supposed to." David turned his eyes back to the ceiling tile, the stain near the corner, the same one he had woken up to. Something real and fixed. He breathed through it, slowly, in and out. His jaw was tight. His hand on the blanket was flat and still. He looked at Jerome. He shaped 2 words carefully, the way a man places weight on a beam he is not yet sure will hold. "Make her." He stopped, tried again. "Go." Jerome crossed the room without a word. He put a gentle hand on Petra's arm. He spoke to her quietly, close, his voice too low for David to hear. The door opened. The door closed. The monitor beeped. The hiss behind his head continued. David sat in the silence of the room he had woken up in the life he did not yet fully understand the shape of, and let the fact of it settle over him the way a structure settles, slowly, with weight, finding the level it will hold. His jaw stayed set. His eyes stayed open. His mind, the part of him that had always thought in load and consequence, in cause and effect, in what holds and what breaks, had already begun. Jerome came back through the door. He sat in his chair without speaking. He did not reach for David's hand this time. He just sat. A long moment passed. David turned his head toward him. "Notebook," he said. Jerome arrived before the breakfast tray did. David heard the door and opened his eyes. The room was still gray with early morning light, the kind that hadn't fully decided to be day yet. Jerome came in carrying 2 coffees in paper cups, and his notebook tucked under his arm like it always was, like it was a part of him, like a man who carries a hammer, keeps it close out of habit even when there's nothing to drive. He set 1 coffee on the tray table. He set the notebook beside it. He sat down. He didn't say anything. David pushed himself upright, slower than he wanted to, but faster than yesterday. His right hand was steadier this morning. His speech had come back another increment overnight. He could feel it, the way you feel a muscle loosening after days of work. The words were closer to where he needed them to be. He picked up the notebook. Jerome had kept it in chronological order. The handwriting was small and even. The hand of a man who had spent decades filling out postal logs and legal documents where precision was not optional. The first entry was dated the day of David's accident. The last entry was 11 days ago. David read slowly. He read about the early weeks, the daily visits from Petra, the names of the nurses who rotated through his care, the flowers someone from his firm sent, that Jerome noted with the same flat neutrality he gave everything else. He read Jerome's account of André Thibodeau's first visit. A T, Petra's colleague. Arrived 4:12 p.m. Did not stay long. Asked floor nurse about patient status. The second visit, 6 weeks later. At, again. Spoke to doctor. Ash in hallway outside room. Asked specifically about prognosis timeline. Ash said improving. At left within 10 minutes. The third visit, 3 weeks after that. AT stood at the door. Did not come in. Left. After the third visit, nothing. Andre's name did not appear in the notebook again. David set his thumb on that page and held it there for a moment. A man who came to take a measurement. Who stopped coming once the measurement no longer gave him the answer he needed. He kept reading. Petra's visits tracked down the right side of the pages in Jerome's compact notation. Daily through month 2, then every other day, then weekly. By month 5, the gaps had widened to 10 days, 2 weeks. By month 7, there was a 2-week stretch with only a single entry. Petra, 20 minutes, did not speak to nursing staff. After that, nothing. Her name disappeared from the notebook the way Andre's had, not with drama, just with absence. Then, 9 months in, Near the bottom of a page, P in hallway. Visibly pregnant. Approx. 7 months. Noted 6:47 p.m. One sentence. The date, the time. David closed the notebook. He set it carefully on the tray table. He picked up the coffee Jerome had brought and held it with both hands, not drinking it yet, just holding the warmth of it. "I need you," he said, the words coming clean and even now, "to call your contact." At the legal aid office. Jerome nodded. He had been expecting this. "I need the financial records, everything she had access to under the power of attorney." He paused, choosing the next words deliberately, the way he chose materials, for load, for purpose. Account statements, transfers, all of it. "I'll call this morning," Jerome said. David nodded once. He set the coffee down. Camille arrived that afternoon carrying a paper bag from the deli 2 blocks from their firm's office, the same deli where she and David had eaten lunch at least once a week for 4 years. She set it on the windowsill and then turned and looked at him for a long moment, with the particular expression of someone who has rehearsed staying composed and is succeeding, but only just. "You look like yourself," she said. "Mostly. Working on the rest," David said. She pulled the chair close and sat. She asked about his therapy schedule, his sleep, the tremor in his hand. He answered honestly. Better, inconsistent, almost gone. Then she told him about the project he'd been running before the accident, how the team had held it together, how it was going to need him back. He told her he'd be back. She believed him. Then she folded her hands in her lap and looked at him with the kind of careful directness that meant she had been deciding whether to say something for a while, and had finally decided. "I drove by your house," she said. "Twice while you were here." David didn't move. "Tell me." "First time was a Tuesday. Nighttime, maybe 11. I was going to drop food off. His car was in the driveway. She said the way people say a word they'd rather not have reason to use. I didn't stop. Second time? 3 months later, Saturday afternoon. His car was there again. A beat. So was a moving truck. They were bringing furniture in. The room was quiet. "Write that down," David said. Camille reached into her bag and pulled out a small notepad without being asked, like she had already known, had already decided what she was going to do when he said it. She wrote the date she'd stopped driving by, both visits, the car, the truck, the time of day. She tore the page out and set it on his tray table next to Jerome's notebook. David looked at the 2 documents side by side. "I need Jerome to find me a family law attorney," he said, "before the end of the week." "I'll help him look," Camille said. Jerome left to make calls just before dinner. Camille walked out with him. David lay back against the pillow. He stared at the ceiling tile, the same one, the water stain near the upper left corner, shaped like nothing, fixed and familiar. His face was still. His breathing was even. There was no grief in his expression. There was only the look of a man examining a structure, tracing its lines, testing its weight, finding every place it was weak. Jerome arrived at 7 in the morning with a manila folder thick enough to press flowers in. He set it on the tray table the way a man sets down something heavy, carefully, with both hands, the way you treat a thing that has weight beyond its physical dimension. He sat. He poured coffee from a thermos he'd started bringing from home because the hospital machine down the hall made coffee that tasted like hot regret. He didn't open the folder. He let David do it. The documents were printed clean, organized by date. Jerome's legal aid contact, a woman named Ruth, who had worked in family law for going on 20 years, had pulled everything she could access and arranged it in chronological order. Jerome had gone through it the night before. He had not slept much afterward. David read slowly. He always read slowly, when the material mattered. The first document was the power of attorney filing. 6 weeks after the accident. 6 weeks, while David was still motionless in this same bed, while Jerome was still learning the names of the night nurses. Petra had filed for emergency financial power of attorney over his affairs. entirely legal. The kind of legal thing that exists for exactly this kind of circumstance, which is also what makes it a perfect instrument for the wrong kind of person. David set that page aside and moved to the next. The joint investment account, the one they had been building together for 11 years, the one where David had deposited portions of every bonus check, every overtime payment, every weekend site inspection fee, had been liquidated in 2 transfers. The first was $47,000, moved 48 days after the power of attorney was filed. The second was $47,000 again, 30 days after that, which told David it had been deliberate, calibrated, that someone had thought about the figure that would draw the least automatic scrutiny. The stated reason on both transfers: medical coordination and household management expenses. Total from the investment account: $94,000. Moved to a personal account in Petra's name alone. David turned the page. The home refinancing came next. She had pulled an equity line against the house using the power of attorney. $60,000, drawn 4 months into his Coma, routed to the same personal account. David set the documents down. He looked at the numbers. He looked at the dates. He thought about the years behind those numbers, the early mornings, the job sites in the rain, the weekends he had spent on second projects so they could build something solid, something that would hold. He thought about the word ours and what he had believed it meant, and what it apparently meant to her, which was different, which had always been different, and he just hadn't known it yet. He did not say anything for a long time. Jerome sat across from him and did not try to fill the silence. Finally, David said, quietly and without heat, $154,000. Yes, Jerome said. While I was in this bed. Yes. David picked up his coffee. He drank it. He set the cup back down with the same steady, deliberate movement he used for everything now. What time is Aldridge coming? Jerome checked his watch. 2 o'clock. Martin Aldridge arrived at 2 o'clock exactly, which told David something about him before he even sat down. He was a compact man in his late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades sitting in rooms where everything that mattered was written on paper, and you learned early to let the paper do the talking. He wore a dark jacket, no tie. He carried a legal pad. He shook David's hand. Both of them registered that David's grip was back. And he sat in the chair Jerome vacated, and he read through the documents without speaking for 11 minutes. David timed it. When Aldridge looked up, he said, "The transfers are fully actionable under Georgia marital property statutes. The equity line especially. A power of attorney filed under emergency conditions does not grant unlimited authority over marital assets. It grants specific authority for the stated purpose, which was documented as medical coordination." He set the last page down. "She spent it on something else." "Yes," David said. "She did. Do you have documentation of where those funds actually went?" "Jerome's contact is still pulling the bank records on the personal account. We should have them within the week." Aldridge nodded. He made a note. "I can prepare the full divorce filing, financial claims, the power of attorney abuse, recovery of transferred assets, the equity line. I'll include the eyewitness accounts for the marital home and the timeline from your uncle's records." "Prepare it," David said. "Everything you can document, every dollar, every date." Aldridge uncapped his pen. "When do you want me to serve her?" David looked at him. "Not yet," he said. "I need everything assembled before she knows I know anything." He paused, and the pause had the weight of a decision that had already been fully made. "When I move, I want it to be all at once." Aldridge held his gaze for a moment. Then he wrote something on his legal pad and said simply, "Understood." Aldridge left at 3:20. Jerome walked him to the elevator and came back. David was sitting up in the bed, forearms on his knees, looking at the folder of documents still spread across the tray table. Jerome settled into the chair. David said, "Not yet. I need everything before she knows I know anything. Camille arrived at 8:15, carrying 2 coffees and a folder that was almost as thick as Jerome's. She handed David one of the cups, set the folder on the tray table, and pulled the chair close without being asked. She was wearing her work clothes, charcoal blazer, natural hair pinned back, which meant she had come here before the office. David noticed that. He filed it in the same place he filed everything now. I stayed up until 1, she said. I want you to know that, so you appreciate what you're looking at. David almost smiled. Almost. I appreciate it. She opened the folder. André Thibaudot, it turned out, was a man who had been very careful to look like he had nothing to hide. His hospital profile was clean. 12 years at the same institution. Strong patient outcomes. Active on 3 internal committees. His name appeared in 2 published cardiology studies from the previous decade, listed as a contributing author. On paper, he was exactly what he wanted the paper to say. But Camille had gone further than the paper. He sits on the board of a company called Meridian Medical Partners, she said, tapping a printed page near the top of the stack. Private company. They develop outpatient clinical infrastructure. Basically, they build and manage specialty care facilities and then contract with hospital systems to run them. David looked at the page. Meridian Medical Partners, Board of Directors. André Thibaudot, MD, listed 3rd from the top. And, he said, and Meridian has a pending joint contract with the hospital system where Petra works. Camille pointed to a separate document, a public procurement notice, printed from the hospital system's vendor disclosure portal. The contract is still in the approval phase, worth roughly $4 million over 5 years. She paused. André is on the committee that votes to approve outside vendor contracts. David read the page. He read it again. He never disclosed the board seat, Camille said. There's a mandatory conflict of interest declaration form that every committee member files annually. I pulled the public index. His most recent filing lists no outside board affiliation. The room was quiet for a moment. He lied on the disclosure, David said. In writing, on a form that carries institutional consequences. Camille picked up her coffee. I thought you'd want to know that. David set the page down carefully. He thought about André standing in David's hospital hallway, asking Dr. Ash about survival odds. He thought about André's car in his driveway on a Tuesday night at 11 o'clock. He thought about the moving truck on a Saturday afternoon, offloading furniture into a house David had paid for. He thought about the word calculation and how well it fit the shape of everything this man had done. What else? David said. The call from Yolanda Price had come through Camille's cell phone the previous evening, just before 10 o'clock. Camille explained it plainly, the way she explained everything. No drama, just sequence. Word had moved through the hospital's professional network that David Warren was awake and recovering. It had apparently reached Dr. Yolanda Price, a senior physician who had worked alongside André and Petra for going on 6 years, and she had tracked down Camille through 2 mutual contacts. She knew who I was because of the infrastructure project, Camille said. She asked if I had contact with you. I told her I was visiting tomorrow. She asked me to tell you she wanted to talk. About André, David said. About André. Camille folded her hands in her lap. She told me enough on the phone that I think you need to hear the rest of it directly. But what she told me was this. She has watched him do this before. David looked at her. There was another woman, a married colleague, different department, about 4 years ago. Camille's voice stayed level. Yolanda said the pattern was the same. He identified someone going through something difficult, someone whose professional life made them dependent on relationships in that building, and he moved in. It became serious enough that the woman's marriage ended. She paused. Then André stepped back, managed his exit, left her to deal with everything that came after. David was quiet. Yolanda documented what she saw at the time. Camille continued. She never filed anything because she didn't think anyone would act on it. But she said if David Warren is building a case, she used those words, building a case, she will put everything she witnessed into a formal statement. Both instances, everything she has. Why now? David said. Camille considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. She said she's tired of watching him walk the hallways like the rules are for other people. David looked down at the folder, at the board disclosure, at the contract number, at the name printed on the Meridian letterhead in clean, professional type. He picked up his phone. He found Aldridge's number. He read it aloud and handed the phone to Camille. Put her in contact with him, he said. Tell her to bring everything she has. Camille wrote the number down without comment. David leaned back. He thought about what he was holding now. The financial records, the timestamps in Jerome's notebook, the eyewitness accounts, Dr. Ash's clinical records, and now a senior physician willing to put a pattern of behavior into writing with her name attached to it. He thought about how a structure holds, how you don't apply the load until every joint is sound. Tell her I said thank you, he said. Tell her it matters. Camille nodded. David reached over to the tray table and picked up Aldridge's card. The discharge paperwork took 40 minutes. David sat in the wheelchair they required him to use. Hospital policy, the nurse explained apologetically, and he let Jerome handle the desk. Forms, signatures, the plastic bag of personal items that had been held in storage for 10 months. His watch, his wallet, his wedding ring, still in its original envelope, still sealed. He did not open the envelope. Jerome took it from him without a word and put it in his jacket pocket. The automatic doors slid open, and the morning air hit David full in the face, warm and unhurried, carrying the smell of cut grass and car exhaust, and the particular aliveness of a world that had kept moving without him. He closed his eyes for a moment and just breathed it in. Jerome's truck was parked close. An old Ford, dark blue, immaculate as always. Jerome opened the passenger door and waited. He did not hover, did not offer his hand. He simply waited, the way he had always waited, steady and present, without making anything into a production. David got in on his own. Jerome's house was a 20-minute drive through a neighborhood where people had lived long enough to plant real trees. The kitchen smelled like something had been cooking since before sunrise. Smothered chicken, cornbread, rice, a pitcher of sweet tea on the counter already sweating in the morning warmth. David sat down at the kitchen table, and Jerome set a plate in front of him without ceremony. He ate. Not quickly. Slowly. The way a man eats when the food means something beyond the food. Jerome sat across from him and ate his own plate, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with anything it didn't require. After the meal, David slept in Jerome's spare room, in a real bed with a real pillow, and the sleep that came was deep and without interruption. When he woke up, the room was gold, with late afternoon light. He lay still for a minute and listened to the neighborhood. A lawnmower somewhere down the block, a screen door banging shut, a car radio fading past. He thought, I am still here. Then he got up. Aldridge arrived the following morning at 9 o'clock sharp, briefcase in hand, and spread the complete case file across Jerome's kitchen table. They worked through it methodically, the three of them, Aldridge presenting each element in sequence, while David read and Jerome sat to the side with his coffee, listening to the architecture of everything he had helped build without knowing, back when he was just a man in a hospital hallway who believed in writing things down. The financial claims were airtight. The investment account liquidation, the equity line, the power of attorney transfers, every dollar documented, every date stamped, every receiving account identified. Aldridge said the word actionable 4 times, and meant it each time. Camille's written statement was in there, clean and precise. The way Camille did everything, addresses, dates, times, descriptions of the vehicles present, the moving truck, the furniture. signed and notarized. Yolanda Price's formal statement was behind it. Longer, more detailed than David had expected. It named dates, described conversations, laid out the prior instance with the other woman in language that was careful but damning. Aldridge said the medical board would find it difficult to set aside. Jerome's notebook had been transcribed and notarized as well. Every entry, every timestamp, every observation logged from his months at David's bedside. Andre's 3 visits, the questions about survival odds, the abrupt departure when the prognosis shifted favorable. All of it dated. All of it signed. David turned the pages slowly. He did not rush through it. When he was finished, he looked up at Aldridge and said, "It's ready." Aldridge said, "It's ready." David made the call to Petra from the kitchen after Aldridge left. He had thought about what he would say and decided the truth was the cleanest option. A version of it anyway. The version that kept her standing still for 7 more days. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice was careful in the way a person's voice is when they have been rehearsing how to answer. "David. Petra." He kept his voice easy, unhurried. "I wanted to hear your voice." A pause. Then, "How are you feeling?" "Better," he said. "Getting there." He let a moment pass. "I've been thinking. I'd like to have dinner at the house. Next week, once I've had more time to get steady on my feet. I want to talk. Just talk." Another pause. Longer this time. He could hear her breathing recalibrate. "Okay," she said. "Yes, I think that would be. Yes, I'd like that." "I'm not angry," he said. And the steadiness in his voice was real, because it was not anger that he was carrying anymore. It was something far more organized than that. "Okay," she said again. Softer now, relieved in a way she was not trying to hide. They agreed on a day. He told her he would come to her. She thanked him. He said goodnight. He set the phone down. Then he dialed Aldridge. "1 week," he said. "Have the papers ready to serve the morning after." "They'll be ready," Aldridge said. After that, he called Dr. Ashe at the number she had given him before discharge. She picked up on the 2nd ring. He made his request clearly. Formal notarization of her clinical documentation, prepared for legal filing, her records of Andre's hospital visits, her records of the questions he asked, her records of how quickly he left when the answers stopped working in his favor. Dr. Ashe was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "I'll have it to your attorney by end of week," she said. "I've been waiting for someone to ask." That evening, Jerome brought 2 cups of coffee out to the porch and handed one to David without a word. The street was settling into its nighttime quiet. Porch lights coming on down the block. The trees going dark and still. Somewhere, a television murmured behind someone's curtained window. They sat for a long time without speaking. Jerome turned his cup in his hands. He looked out at the street. Then he said it plainly, the way he said everything. "You sure?" David looked out at the same darkness. "I've been sure," he said, "since I saw her walk through that door." The house looked the same from the outside. Same brick, same mailbox, same 2 steps up to the front door. The oak tree in the front yard had put on another season of growth, and the lower branches hung a little heavier than David remembered. That was the only difference he could see. He sat in the car for a moment, not hesitating, just looking. Then he got out. He used his key. The inside of the house smelled different. A candle, something floral, and underneath it, something unfamiliar that had moved in and made itself at home in the months he was gone. He noticed it and set it aside. The kitchen table was the same table. Dark walnut, 6 chairs, bought at an estate sale 4 years ago because Petra had loved the legs. David pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the one he had always sat in, and lowered himself into it. He set the folder on the chair to his right, closed. He poured 2 glasses of water from the pitcher on the counter, set one at his place and one across from him, and then He folded his hands on the table. And he waited. Petra's car pulled into the driveway at 6:14. He heard the engine cut, heard the car door, heard the particular sound of her key in the front lock, the small habit of it, the specific rhythm. 10 years of the same sound. She came into the kitchen and stopped when she saw him. He watched her take him in. The way he was sitting, both hands on the table, posture easy, expression settled. She had expected something else. He could see it in the half-second recalibration that moved across her face before her composure caught up. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been carrying something heavy and was very practiced at making sure it didn't show. "David," she said. "Sit down," he said. Not unkindly. She sat. She looked at the water glass in front of her, and then looked at him. He nodded once. "Go ahead." And he meant it. He had built the space for this deliberately, the way you leave room in a structure for the forces you already know are coming. She spoke for several minutes. He had expected rehearsal. And there it was, the pacing of it, the careful sequencing of grief before loneliness, before I didn't know if you were coming back. She talked about the silence of those first months. She talked about fear. She talked about Andre in the way people talk about a mistake they are still partially defending. "It wasn't what I thought it was. It was never supposed to go this far. I know that doesn't help you. I know." She did not cry. He noticed that. She had decided not to. When she stopped talking, the kitchen was very quiet. David looked at her for a moment. Then he reached to the chair beside him and picked up the folder. He opened it. He set the first page on the table between them, turned so she could read it. "6 weeks after my accident," he said, "you liquidated $94,000 from our joint investment account." His voice was level, unhurried, the voice of a man reading from a set of engineering specifications. "You cited medical coordination costs. The funds went to a personal account I had no access to." Petra looked at the page. The equity line came 2 months later. He placed the second document beside the first. 60,000, drawn on the house under power of attorney. Same account. She said his name. $154,000, he said. "Moved out of our shared life while I was unconscious." "David, I was managing. I had to keep the house running. The bills were—" "Petra." He said it quietly, not loudly, just with enough weight to stop the sentence. "I've seen the statements. I know where the money went, and I know where it didn't go." She closed her mouth. He moved to the next page. "Andre came to the hospital 3 times, not to ask how I was doing. Jerome was in the hallway." He looked up at her. "He heard Andre ask my doctor directly about the odds I'd survive. When the prognosis got better, Andre stopped coming. He never came back after month 3. Something moved across her face, something she hadn't rehearsed for. "Jerome kept a log," David said. "Every visit, every date, every timestamp from the parking garage." He set Jerome's transcribed notebook pages down, one by one, like cards. "You stopped coming by month 7. Not because the situation became too painful." He paused. "Because the situation had already resolved itself for you." Petra's composure came apart, the way a wall comes apart when the foundation has been wrong all along, not in one sudden collapse, but in stages. First, the stillness of a person who has run out of the right words. Then, the reach for anger, the desperate pivot. "How dare you reduce this to spreadsheets when I was alone and terrified and—" "The divorce papers are in the folder." David's voice didn't change. He set them on the table and slid them toward her with 2 fingers. "Aldridge will serve them formally in the morning. I wanted to hand them to you myself." She stared at them. "I hope you and the baby are healthy." He said it the way he meant it. Clean, simple, free of performance. His decency was his own. She had not managed to take that from him. He picked up his keys from the table. He stood. He walked out of the house. He did not look back. The papers landed at 9:07 in the morning. Aldridge's process server, a compact, unhurried woman named Mrs. Holt, arrived at the house with the stamped and signed filing in a manila envelope. She rang the bell once. When Petra opened the door, Mrs. Holt confirmed her name, placed the envelope in her hands, noted the time in her log, and walked back to her car. That was it. That was how 10 years ended on paper. Petra's attorney filed a duress argument the following week. The argument was this: Petra had been alone, terrified, and uncertain whether her husband would ever regain consciousness. The financial decisions she made under power of attorney were acts of necessity, not exploitation. She was a woman managing a household in crisis without a partner. It was a reasonable argument, constructed carefully, and it arrived at Aldridge's office looking confident. Aldridge had been waiting for it. He submitted Dr. Ash's notarized clinical timeline in response. 41 pages of time-stamped medical records, progress notes, and documented prognosis updates. The records showed something specific and damaging. Petra's hospital visits did not decline as David's condition worsened. They declined as his condition improved. Month 1 through 3. Daily visits. Prognosis. Critical. Uncertain. Month 4 through 6. Weekly, then bi-weekly. Prognosis. Stabilizing. Month 7. Petra stopped coming entirely. Prognosis. Recovery probable. The investment account liquidation happened in month 2. The equity line was drawn in month 4. Both transfers occurred in the precise window when David's survival was still in question. The argument was not that Petra acted alone in fear. The documents told a different story, one about a woman who moved quickly and decisively while her husband was at his most vulnerable and stopped managing the crisis the moment she could see it resolving without her involvement. The judge was not sympathetic. The equity line was flagged for full judicial review. The investment account transfer was ordered partially restored. $61,000 returned to a court-managed account pending final settlement. The house went into sale proceedings. Petra had 30 days to make other arrangements. She did not keep the house. The baby came 6 weeks after the dinner. A girl, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, born on a Tuesday morning at the same hospital where David had spent 10 months staring at the ceiling. The paternity test was court-ordered as part of the divorce proceedings, a formality that confirmed what everyone already knew. Andre Thibodeau was listed as the biological father on the documentation that went directly to Aldridge's office. Andre had been operating on a private calculation. His version of events had always assumed a quiet arrangement, an informal understanding, some money moved discreetly, his name kept at a manageable distance from the situation. He was a man accustomed to engineering clean exits. He had done it before. He had not accounted for Petra being furious. She had lost the house. She had lost the settlement she expected. She was working longer hours with a newborn and a fraction of the financial cushion she had spent 2 years quietly building. Andre had not called her since the divorce filing hit the news cycle of their professional circle. He communicated through his attorney. Politely, distantly. The way you communicate with a problem you are hoping will reduce itself over time. Petra filed for formal, court-ordered child support. The calculation was drawn from Andre's complete documented income, his attending physician's salary, his private practice billing records, and his board compensation from the medical development company. Aldridge had assembled that financial picture months earlier during the marital asset litigation, and when Petra's family attorney requested the same documentation, it was already in the system. The monthly figure was substantial, not ruinous. Andre would still drive a nice car and live in a nice building and eat at nice restaurants. But it was a number he would write every single month for 18 years, and it had been determined by a court that had seen every dollar he earned and had done the math without sentiment. He was not present at the birth. He did not hold the baby in the hospital. Petra's mother flew in from Birmingham and stayed 3 weeks, and those were the 3 best weeks Petra had that year. Separately and methodically, Aldridge worked the financial litigation from a different angle. The marital home had been actively used as a shared residence by André Thibodeau for a documented period. Camille's eyewitness account placed his car in the driveway on a Tuesday at 11 p.m. and confirmed the offloading of his furniture on a Saturday afternoon. Jerome's notebook gave timestamps. The conclusion was not difficult to reach. André had benefited from a household sustained by marital assets, including an equity line drawn on a home he had no legal claim to. His attempts to maintain clean legal distance from the divorce proceedings failed. He retained separate counsel. The fees were significant. The arguments his attorney made were not bad. They simply ran directly into a wall of documentation that had been assembled by a man with an engineer's understanding of what load-bearing evidence looks like. The judge found that André had materially benefited from the dissipation of marital assets. That finding had consequences. Yolanda Price filed her formal workplace conduct complaint on a Wednesday morning in writing, with supporting documentation she had been quietly assembling for longer than anyone knew. The second woman, the one Yolanda had referenced, the prior instance, the married colleague from 4 years earlier, contacted Aldridge's office independently 3 days later. She did not want money. She wanted a record. She got a formal meeting with a medical board ethics review panel, and she arrived prepared, composed, and thorough. 2 complaints, 2 credible women, 2 distinct situations separated by years, describing the same pattern of behavior from the same man. The panel did not revoke André's license. The evidentiary standard was high, and neither complaint crossed into criminal territory. But the review was entered into his permanent professional record, the one that every hospital credentialing committee and every insurance board and every potential employer in the medical system would see permanently from that point forward. The conflict of interest audit came next. The ethics inquiry had triggered it automatically, a mandatory review of André's board activity during the period covered by the complaints. The audit surfaced something that had been sitting quietly in the financial records for 2 years. André had voted to approve contract terms that directly benefited his own private medical development company while serving on the hospital's oversight board. He had not disclosed the conflict. He had simply voted. A senior board member who had been uneasy about André for years recognized the opening and did not hesitate to use it. André resigned his board seat 4 days before the removal vote was scheduled. His public statement cited personal and professional obligations requiring his full attention. Nobody who read it believed a word of it. The pending joint contract between his company and the hospital system was pulled into a secondary review. It was restructured. It was awarded to a competing firm. He lost the seat. He lost the contract. He lost the revenue stream that board position represented, and he lost every future opportunity that would have grown from it. The professional network he had spent years cultivating, the board relationships, the institutional goodwill, the carefully managed reputation, developed a specific, quiet crack that would not close. Aldridge called David on a Thursday afternoon. David was at the drafting table in the spare room of Jerome's house, working through load calculations for a retaining wall section on the transit corridor project. His reading glasses were on. His coffee had gone cold. He picked up on the second ring. Aldridge's voice was professional and precise, the same as always, but there was something underneath it, a particular quality of satisfaction that a man develops after years of handling cases that don't resolve cleanly, when one finally does. He read David the child support figure. There was a brief silence. "That's not my problem anymore," David said. Aldridge laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind that comes out when a man stops managing his reaction and just has one. David thanked him. He meant it. He hung up. He set the phone down on the drafting table beside his coffee cup. He looked at it for a moment. Then he picked up his pencil and went back to his blueprints. The sun was not fully up yet. David walked the site in the gray light before the crew arrived, hard hat on, clipboard in hand, boots crunching over packed Georgia clay. The transit corridor stretched out ahead of him, concrete pillars rising from the red earth, steel crossbeams catching the first pale color of morning. It was going to be something. He could see it already, the way he had always been able to see the finished thing inside the unfinished one. He moved between the pillars without thinking about his stride. The limp was almost entirely gone now. Some mornings he forgot it had ever been there. He stopped at Pillar 7, crouched down, and checked the base inspection tag. Signed, dated, initialed. Everything where it was supposed to be. He stood back up and made a small mark on his clipboard and kept walking. This was the part of the job he loved most, before the noise, before the crew and the equipment and the radios crackling and the foreman calling his name every 6 minutes. Just him and the structure and the quiet agreement between what he had designed and what was actually being built. He thought, "This is mine," not possessively, just accurately. The house was smaller than the one on the other side of Atlanta. He had chosen it himself, in a neighborhood where the yards were modest and the driveways were cracked in the agreeable way of places where people actually lived. He knew his neighbors' names. The couple to his left had a dog named Biscuit, who got out of the fence at least once a week. The retired teacher across the street waved to him every morning from her own porch without fail. He had a porch. That had been the only requirement on his list when he was looking. He had written it down. Porch. One word. Aldridge's paralegal had looked at the paper and smiled. He drank his coffee out there every morning before the drive to the site. On the mornings without a pressing deadline, he sat longer than he needed to, watching the street come alive. The first dog walkers, the garbage truck, the school bus, the slow, ordinary machinery of a neighborhood doing what neighborhoods do. He did not take it for granted. He had learned not to. Jerome came every Sunday. They watched football. Jerome brought food about half the time and accepted food the other half without making a thing of either. They argued about the same teams they had always argued about, and came to the same conclusions they always came to, and it was good. The specific, irreplaceable goodness of time spent with someone who knows you without requiring any explanation. Jerome still had the notebook. David had never asked him to throw it away. Jerome had never offered. It sat somewhere in Jerome's house, in a drawer or on a shelf, its pages filled with careful handwriting that had once been just a habit and had become something else. David did not need to look at it anymore, but he was glad it existed. He understood now why certain things needed to be kept, not because you planned to use them again, but because they were true, and truth deserved to be held somewhere solid. Camille had been promoted to senior project director 6 months after David returned to work. He had not been surprised. He had, in fact, told her it was coming, before she believed it herself. They had dinner once a month, the two of them, at a rotating cast of restaurants that Camille chose because she had opinions about food, and David trusted her judgment. She had brought someone to the last dinner, a quiet man named Marcus who worked in urban planning, who listened when other people talked and laughed at the right moments, and reached across the table for Camille's hand naturally, without thinking about it. David had watched them together across the table and thought, "That man is good to her." He had said so in a voicemail on the drive home, off the cuff, just because it was true and it seemed worth saying. Camille had called him back laughing, a little flustered, and told him he was embarrassing her. He had said he didn't see how. Dr. Ashe sent a card every year on the anniversary of his waking, never long. The same card stock, the same measured handwriting, the same 2 words at the bottom. Still remarkable. He kept them in the kitchen drawer, between the takeout menus and the extra batteries. He didn't know exactly why. He didn't examine it too closely. Some things you keep because putting them away feels wrong, and that is reason enough. The professional gathering was a regional infrastructure symposium in Savannah. A 2-day event, good speakers, better networking, the kind of thing David attended now because his name carried weight, and he had stopped pretending that was not true. A mutual acquaintance, a man named Gerald who meant no harm and had never mastered the art of reading a room, mentioned Petra in passing at the cocktail hour. Not cruelly, just conversationally, in the way that people fill silences with information they assume is shared currency. She was raising her daughter mostly alone, Gerald said. Had to sell the house. Working longer hours these days. Seemed tired in a specific way. The tiredness, David recognized, of someone whose carefully engineered life had not built what they expected it to. David held his glass. He listened. He did not perform sympathy, and he did not perform satisfaction. When Gerald finished, David said he hoped things got easier for her. And he meant it, fully, without remainder, the clean sincerity of a man who had finished grieving something and set it down completely, and walked away from it without looking back. Gerald nodded and moved on to other topics. David finished his drink. André Thibodeau paid child support every month. The court-determined figure, drawn from his full documented income, arrived on a schedule he had no mechanism to alter. He would write that check, or its electronic equivalent, every single month for 18 years. Not as punishment exactly, just as the mathematical result of what he had done and who he had done it to. He carried a permanent ethics review in his professional record. He had resigned his board seat under circumstances that required a public statement no one believed. He was known in his professional community in the specific, quiet, irreversible way of a man whose conduct had been examined and found wanting. People still shook his hand at events. People still called him doctor. But something had changed in those interactions. A fractional withdrawal, a slight adjustment in how much weight anyone placed on his word, that he felt and could not address and would feel for the rest of his career. He had not gained a family. He had gained a payment schedule and a permanent record, and the private, unshared knowledge of exactly what his calculation had cost him. David got home from Savannah on a Friday evening. He changed out of his conference clothes. He made coffee. Real coffee, not hotel coffee, and he took it out to the porch and sat down in the chair he had bought because it fit him right. The neighborhood was warm and unhurried. The light was going golden and slow the way it did in late Georgia evening, spreading itself across the rooftops and the yards and the cracked sidewalks without any urgency at all. Somewhere down the street, children were playing, the particular sound of it carrying in the cooling air, high and bright and unself-conscious. He drank his coffee. He thought about the bridge, the pedestrian bridge, his first one, the one that thousands of people crossed every single day without knowing his name or thinking about the man who built it. He thought about a ceiling tile and the sound of a monitor and Jerome's face, wet with tears, and the long climb back from a place most people don't come back from. He thought about a folder on a dinner table and a door he had walked out of on his own 2 feet, with everything he needed already in his hands. I built a bridge that thousands of people cross every day. I woke up from 10 months of darkness. I walked out of my own house on my own 2 feet. He finished his coffee. I am still here. That is enough. That is everything. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.